here's the trap. We finally got him. We'll force him to make his move. And either way, he either loses his constituency or he loses his life. Now he's already doing a counter gotcha. I mean, how can I pay taxes if I don't carry the coin? And what it says in Greek is theos, sebastos, Kaiser. Now in English that is God, Augustus, Caesar. Sebastos is the Greek word for Augustus. It's Caesar the Augustus, like Jesus the Christ.
Dr. Crossan, or Dom, Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and render unto God that which is God. You titled this fascinating book that you just authored that very thing. And I've had some people's interpretations go so far as to say, Jesus is pro-Roman, actually. Then you have some who are saying he's a rebel, and he's really saying no to it altogether. You just did this discussion with me on globalization in John. Yeah. What is Jesus doing? Maybe a better question, before what Jesus is doing, what are others trying to do to Jesus?
Yeah.
And then take us into this.
All right. And as a sort of a prelude, let me remind you that the Romans crucified Jesus, just so we don't forget that. So obviously they weren't enamored of his pro-Roman stance if he had one. Anyway, let me back up. You have to imagine the situation. Usually we quote, as you did quite rightly, the render unto Caesar. And for a lot of people, that's like a Jesus one-liner. And he's great one-liners. Blessed are the poor. He tells parables and one-liners. Very, very memorable. But this is not a one-liner. This is the last phrase of an incident. It's like if I were to quote you the punchline of a joke, and you said, I don't see that's funny. Well, no, I'd have to tell you the whole joke. What's happening is Jesus is being kind of put on the spot. It's in the temple in Jerusalem, as it's imagined. Do we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Oh, wow. That's an invitation to juggle dynamite. Because if he says no, that's high treason or low treason or whatever you want to call it. That's treason. And if we're in Jerusalem during Passover, when the situation is absolutely volatile, because the Jews are celebrating deliverance from Egypt, when they're under Rome, and anything is dangerous. So, if he says, don't pay your taxes, treason. If he says, yes, pay your taxes, he's one more pro-Roman. So it sounds like a gotcha.
And just to specify for those viewers, if he says pay to Caesar, his following, which are very Jewish and hoping the kingdom of God would come in, which is a whole other thing we haven't painted a picture for. But there's an expectation that God's reign and rule, not the emperor, not Caesar, but God himself would reign and rule with his people. That's kind of underlining this whole thing. So here's this following of this Jewish guy named Jesus that the Jews who are siding with him are listening. If he were to say, pay taxes to Caesar,
he's just lost his
following. Right.
He's just lost his constituency.
The other thing is he's probably going to get killed like that if he says don't pay taxes to Caesar. So he's kind of getting tricked or trapped.
Yeah. If I can back up a little bit, because it's important. What Jesus is doing in Galilee is he's going with the tradition, which says that God's rule, not Rome's rule, is how we are to live our lives. That's the tradition. He's got traction on that tradition because the Sea of Galilee has just become the Lake of Tiberias. Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, is commercializing the lake. So we're back with globalization. To get into the globalization pattern, you don't want people going down and fishing in the Sea of Galilee and eating their own fish or selling their own fish locally. What you want to do is commercialize it. So you can take salted fish or dried fish or garum fish sauce out to Tyre and the Mediterranean globalization. Make much more money. That's why Antipas has changed his capital from Sepphoris to Tiberias, right on the lake, so he can run the commercialization of the lake, and why Jesus' first followers are fishers. Mary of Magdala, the biggest fishing village until Tiberias' plunked next to it. So he's got traction. He's got a Occupy the Lake program going, as it were. So now, what happens, I think, is Jesus is invited, bring your movement to Jerusalem for Passover. I think that's what happens. Because we have to understand, if he went up regularly, which I don't believe a poor day laborer could, what happened this one time? If he only went up this one time, why did he go up this time? So you have to explain why he's in Jerusalem, one way or the other, and gets crucified. I think he was invited by his relatives, Lazarus, Martha and Mary. Come up to Jerusalem, you'll be safe. Because every night, come out to Bethany. That's around the Mount of Olives, away from Jerusalem. Don't stay in Jerusalem at night. Come out, and during the day, you'll be safe. The crowd is on your side. You have followers here. So Jesus does not go up to Jerusalem to get himself crucified. If he did, it wouldn't take a week. Rome was very obliging. They do it immediately for you. So, safe by day because the crowd in the temple protects him, as they say in Mark repeatedly. Yes, the high priests are worried about what he's doing, and they might want him executed, but the people are on his side. Safe by day, safe by night because he's in Bethany. Okay, so that's the background. Now, on what is Tuesday in Mark's story, our Tuesday, as it were, of Holy Week, here's the trap. We finally got him. We'll force him to make his move. And either way, he either loses his constituency or he loses his life. Either way, we're finished with him. He's home free, no more problems. Now, first thing Jesus does, by the way, is he doesn't carry the coin. He says, show me the coin. And then he asks, what? Image and inscription are on the coin. Now he's already doing a counter gotcha. I mean, how can I pay taxes if I don't carry the coin? So that's one thing. Then he looks at the coin. Now here's the point of the first, of the picture on the cover, as it were, of the book. And the first section. We have to imagine, today, us, what coin is at least Mark imagining, or Jesus saw? What coin would elicit the response of Jesus, render, render? The best coin, this is not original with me, this is an Australian numismatist, has argued, and I think it's absolutely right, and I give him full credit for it. The coin would have said, it's what's called a tetradrachma in terms of its power. That's like if denarius was a single day's pay, 4 denarii, or 4 drachmas, Latin or Greek, would be at the pay for, say, 4 days. It's a silver coin. The Latin denarius is a tiny little coin like that. Our dime, size of our dime. And it has Latin on it, first of all, which I don't know if I'd be able to read. And it's abbreviated Latin, to get it all in. So I think unless you knew Latin well, you wouldn't even know how to read it.
And this wouldn't have been the lingua franca, the common tongue?
Not at all, not in this situation. So I'm convinced that it's this, I say a Greek coin in the sense it's written in Greek. And what it says in Greek is Theos, Sebastos, Kaiser. Now in English that is God, Augustus, Caesar. Sebastos is the Greek word for Augustus. And we kind of got used to Augustus as if it was just his name. And, Mr. and Mrs. Augustus's little boy Augustus.
It's a title, right?
It's a title. It's like it's Caesar the Augustus. Like Jesus the Christ. And Augustus is not just, it's not just court protocol. Sebastos is from the verb sebo or sebomai, which means to worship. God worshippers in the Acts of the Apostles are sebomonai. They're worshippers. So Sebastos means the one to be worshipped. And you might say, well, aren't the other gods to be worshipped? Or is this the one who is to be really worshipped or super worshipped? So Sebastos is a theological term. It ain't just a nice little court protocol. Let's call him that and make him feel good. So Theos, Sebastos, Kaiser is a very clear statement. God is Caesar. Caesar is God. So what's your problem? I've just shown you a coin that equates them. Are you supposed to render you could say the message of the coin is Render to God the things that are Caesar's. Render to Caesar the things that are God, because they're the same. The coin equates them. Now what Jesus does, very carefully, he separates them. In a world where Caesar is God, he says render to Caesar and render to God. And things is nice and vague. Things could include taxes, but whatever. Things isn't there in Greek in any words. It's understood. Give Caesar stuff back to Caesar, by the way. It's not just give, it's apodote in Greek. It's give back to Caesar, Caesar stuff, whatever that stuff is. Give back to God, God's stuff. Now, what's clear in that is that he's not equating them. Clear as day. If you have to separate two types of stuff, they're not equated. And at the end of it, it says they were amazed at him. Yeah, because he got out of his double bind. First of all, because he doesn't carry it and you guys do. So he's already got you. And then he comes out, though, at the end, he doesn't just say, He says, you've equated and I've separated. And of course, in the Jewish world, even Josephus, who is as pro-Roman as they come, says God, that's the big G, the Jewish God, has given power to Caesar. So they're never like this. They're like that. So basically, what he has separated, they have equated. Now that gives me the question for my book. That's lovely. God and Caesar are separated. But excuse me, Jesus, I have to live under them both. So the next thing I did in the book then was to ask, how did some of those early Christians decide to live under both? We have to live under Caesar. We have to live under God, of course. How do we negotiate that duality? And then I went into the two models, the two very opposing models. The book of Revelation absolutely demonizes acculturation to Rome, and Luke Acts, which canonizes it. And then, of course, the final question is, well, have we any idea how Jesus did it? After all, he was the one who pulled the separation, but he had to live under them. How did he do it? And is that maybe why he ended up dead? Did he not do it right? Did he not do it well? Or what happened? So the logic of the book is you're given separation, but you have to live under them both. You have to reconcile them, or my term was acculturate them. How do you integrate them? The two models then in the first century, the polarization within the New Testament, which makes our polarization today religiously and politically look almost like a Sunday school picnic or something. And then the final reconciliation in the last part of the book. What does Jesus do?
There's so many things in that book that have me thinking, why did Jesus die? Okay. Did he really plan on dying, like the Gospels paint it?
Yeah.
Because you have a suffering servant model you can kind of utilize.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me this guy was really making a jab at the political world in which he lived. But he may not have been. I have friends who think he was a rebel, that he may have been militant. Yeah. How do you feel about that hypothesis?
All right, let me begin with Rome and sort of bracket Jesus for a moment. Roman law made a very, very clear distinction between armed rebellion and what we would call nonviolent resistance. Now, a very clear distinction. Armed rebellion, you didn't even have to bring them into court. You had the power of the sword, like Pilate, for example, had the jus gladi, the right of the sword. If you'd come out there armed as rebels, he could have gone after you, kill you on the spot. And preferably afterwards, you put the leader and the top lieutenants, as it were, and you crucified them in a row that everyone got the point. If you saw a row up there, that's what it meant. In the New Testament, for example, we have the parable, I think, of Barabbas, who's in jail, not alone, but with the others who were freedom fighters from the Jewish point of view. Robbers, lestes is the word for rebels from the Roman point of view. They've done armed rebellion. Now, in the civil law of Rome, we have it. People who authors of sedition, that's their term. Sedition is what they would call stirring up the people. Now, Rome didn't worry about talk. It worried about activism, in between armed rebellion and talk. If you were a cynic philosopher and you were telling everyone that power was rubbish and you should live, just for the bare minimum of life, they didn't worry about you. If philosophers annoyed Rome, they might boot them out of Rome every now and then.
So you're telling me if Jesus said, go sell all that you own and come follow me, help the widows, help the poor, go lay your hands on, heal the sick, the lame, and if anything, Rome would have been probably cool with it. Like,
yes.
Hey, okay.
Let me put it bluntly. If Jesus was into charity, almsgiving, helping the poor, Pilate would have reached out and said, have a lovely day, Jesus, back to Galilee, no problem. We're all for charity. We're all for almsgiving. We even sometimes ourselves help the poor a little bit. We don't do much of it, but it's all right. No threat to us. We understand, by all means. Now, if you're talking about justice and distributive justice, we're in charge of that, Jesus. You're not in charge of that. You're in charge of charity and almsgiving. You're in charge of, Pilate wouldn't have said this, cleaning up after the imperial procession. So don't touch justice. That's our business. We will establish justice and distribution and everything else. So if Jesus was involved in that, there would be no problem with Rome. Now, the word that I would use that comes closest to Jesus in our language would be an activist, a non-violent activist. He's not just talking. And the Roman law, which I quote in the book, says that the authors of sedition are those who stir up the people. That's their phrase, stir up the people, disturb the people, shall be, according to their status, this is a lovely phrase, either be crucified, like Jesus was, sent to an island, like John of Patmos was. No. Crucified, thrown to the beasts, that would be like Ignatius of Antioch, or sent to an island. In other words, if you had some status or some sponsor or some defender, we're not going to kill you because that just caused political trouble. We send you to an Aegean island. Get out of here. So Jesus is an activist with followers. They don't try and do exile or anything else. I think he's an activist. He's a movement. And that's actually the way Tacitus and Josephus describe it towards the end of the first century.
Tribe, yeah.
He has a movement. Now, Roman policy, it wasn't toleration at all. They just didn't waste energy. If you're the leader of a movement that's nonviolent, we will kill the leader publicly. Publicly, crucifixion would be good. And we'd hang around his neck what he is. And that'll finish the movement. Because movements without a leader, kill the leader, they're finished. So when Josephus and Tacitus come to describe the Christian movement, they're kind of surprised and have to explain, oh, why didn't it die out after his crucifixion? That's the way it's supposed to be. So Josephus's explanation is that those who were on his side, who loved him before, still loved him after, which is nice. And Tacitus, who perennially has a sneer on his face, says, well, it was an infection, and infection spread, and everything rotten arrives in Rome eventually. Very, superficial, superior. But both of them have to explain, well, if you had a movement and you crucified the founder, and that's 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, why are we still these Christians around here? You have to explain it. So if I just look at the Roman data and take seriously that Pilate crucified Jesus, but didn't round up his followers, I know by that alone that Jesus founded a movement of non-violent opposition to Rome. I really trust Pilate. Yeah, I know the New Testament makes him this tortured Hamlet-like figure. What do I do? What do I do? No, he wasn't. he did exactly what he had to do. Excuse me, especially in the tinderbox atmosphere of Passover. Anyone who stirred up the people, that's exactly what I would expect to happen. And that Jesus got away with it for a while is because he had supporters. So, from the Roman point of view, Jesus was guilty of sedition. And Rome got it right. From their point of view, he was not guilty if they'd rounded up his 11 followers and crucified them all in a row. No, that would be wrong. That would be thinking of them as a violent group. So it's crucially important to look at the Roman data, to look at Roman civil law on seditious people. You have no civil law on rebels. You kill them. You don't even bring them to court. But seditious people, the point of view at which somebody is doing something that goes beyond philosophical criticism and comes down to maybe stirring up the people. It's a very delicate line, as we sometimes find out even in our own experience. When has somebody stirred up the people to the point of sedition and violence, or just sedition alone, or what? So Rome was very careful about what we would call activists. And Jesus was an activist with a following, but was non-violent if all I had to go on was Pilate.
Ladies and gentlemen, join MythVision's Patreon not only to support us, but there are 72 videos that I did with Dr. Dennis R. McDonald and Richard Carrier, all on the Patreon, early access. You guys can ask personal questions when I go to interview these scholars, and you're helping MythVision grow.